Yeah.
All those new.
Yeah. I think it will be more of a city center throughout, this area. So we'll see, but yeah.
So we can get started now.
Oh.
What's your name?
My name?
Yeah.
Gail.
Gail. And Mark, right. Why don't you move up?
Okay.
Yeah. But just don't get miles away, okay? Is this okay, Miles? We're good? Okay. All right, let's see. Well, we have a really small, intimate situation here, so I'm going to try to be as disorganized as I possibly can. When I do these books, my publicist Sharon has, and I have long discussed the fact that when you go to a bookstore or a library for a reading and signing, the author sits there and puts you to sleep, but by droning away from his text, and then everybody feels obliged to at least pass by the table and look at the books before they run out the door. And Sharon and I have determined we're never going to do that unless I become a famous best-selling Stephen King type person, and then I can get away with that. So I come to these basically as a teacher and a conversationalist, and above all, as an author. My books are here. Whether you haven't browsed before, but if you browse through them on the way out, I'd appreciate it. Yesterday, I got 5 emails from a guy named Ted Olzak in New Jersey because I had won 5 new awards in the new NYC Big Book Awards. This book, my latest, she won an award for, these are all distinguished favorite awards, which means that they were top 3 in their category. She won 2 awards for cover design and for mystery. Bistro Nights, which was published at the end of last year, won for literary fiction. Voice of the Dog, which I published in March, won for crime fiction. And The Melting Grandmother, also published last year. This is a collection of short stories, so it won in the short story category. Since I started publishing in 2019, I now have won 42 awards from independent press organizations, which is a perfect squelch for all those publishers and editors in New York who would give me the time of day. But it's also also, to do that with a grain of salt. Independent press organizations have set up a lot of competitions for authors who publish independently. The organizations make a little money on competitions, and so it serves their interests as well as those of the author. But they put together panels of serious judges who are authors and reviewers and so forth. So when you can go to let's see, 10 different independent press organizations and win 42 awards, it suggests that you know what you're doing. I'd like to suggest that I know what I'm doing. And if you don't think so, I'm perfectly willing to argue with you. All right, now we are talking about small town crime. And to begin with, I have to quote Samuel Taylor Coleridge. You know Coleridge? Coleridge? In Xanadu.
Person, is that Tiger?
Yeah.
No.
No, in Xanadu, Kublai
Ah,
the poem Dome to clear our out the sacred river and through caverns measure this command down to a sunless sea. That Coleridge. Also the rhyme of the ancient mariner.
Right.
Yeah. I know lines from that too. But I'm not going to read it. Okay. In his Biographia Literaria, he coined a phrase that's been important to fiction writers ever since. He wrote, "It was agreed that my endeavors should be directed to persons and characters supernatural, or at least romantic, yet so as to transfer from our inward nature a human interest and a semblance of truth sufficient to procure for these shadows of imagination that willing suspension of disbelief for the moment, which constitutes poetic faith." Ever since I knew about story writing, I knew that the reader had to supply that willing suspension of disbelief, which is absolutely essential for small town crime. But this goes back to before people were writing. For instance, cave painting. Cave paintings were not entirely accurate depictions of the deer and wolves and tigers and so forth who roamed the prehistoric world. They were symbolic as much as they were representational. That required in the viewer a suspension of disbelief that you saw the deer in real life, and you saw the deer on the wall of the cave, and they were different, but you believed the deer on the wall because it symbolized the original deer. Hieroglyphics were caricatures that became writing. We have legends that go back to Beowulf, the Iliad, and the Odyssey, the Greek myths, the Bible. Gods and God intervening into human lives. None of us has had a God or God intervene in our lives, and yet we suspend disbelief and we have faith. Coleridge articulated this. All fantasy, fantasy is probably the most popular literary form, especially among young writers, but it's all grounded in the familiar and the quotidian. For instance, Gotham City and Metropolis, we all read those comic books, right? Superman and Batman and so forth. You have superheroes, but they are based in an urban environment that's extremely familiar. Gotham City and Metropolis are both New York. The city, Spider-Man City, is New York. So we have something that's magical, something that's unbelievable, but it's grounded in something that's genuine and true, and we've seen it, we have experience with it. Harry Potter's magic world is set, he begins in the world of the Muggles. His parents are Muggles. And then he moves to Hogwarts and he enters the magic realm, but that's always set against and built upon the real world. I have 1,010, so I'll skip most of them, but for instance, weirdest, scariest, ugliest alien creatures all appear in a cocktail lounge. The grounding, the setting, the realistic element is the cocktail lounge. It makes all the other stuff that much more credible. Now, that brings me to the absurdity of small town crime fiction. Can anybody here name a mystery series, a crime series that they've been reading, that they have read, set in small towns?
The one that comes to mind first for me is Murder, She Wrote with Cabot Cove.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I've been watching, my wife and I are watching the program of mysteries, a small town in New Zealand. One of the favorite small towns for waves of murder is Oxford in England. Inspector Morse had done dozens and dozens of murders in Oxford, followed by Inspector Lewis, who had dozens and dozens of murders in Oxford. But the best Oxford murder stories are by an author named, I can't remember the name of the character, but for minutes from the author's name will escape me. But one of the 10 best mysteries written, according to the extras, is called The Moving Toy Shop, and in which an Oxford don named Gervais Fenn solves the crime. If you don't have a copy of The Moving Toy Shop, it's just a wonderful story, and that whole series of stories, Gervais Fenn, and I'll remember the name of the author in a minute. It's just they're wonderful, funny murder mysteries. One was called Buried for Pleasure. But okay, now we are in Oregon, right? When was the last murder that was committed here?
70s?
70s, okay. And when was there last a mystery murder in Oregon? See, there's the problem, you know? You have a small, I grew up in Tomah. I only remember one murder in my entire, actually I moved out of Tomah before this murder occurred, and it was some crazy kid with a shotgun who charged into the high school and shot the principal, or something like that. You know, it was one of the first school shootings. It was a school shooting before people knew about school shootings, but there was no mystery to it. You know, he was standing there in the hallway over the dead body of the principal with a shotgun in his hand. So the question is, this is entirely improbable. It's improbable for a small town to have a murder. It's increasingly improbable to have a whole series of murders in Cabot Cove. And yet they pile up, the bodies pile up like cordwood. And the question is, why? You know, yes, the term "nothing ever happens around here" is the motto of every small town in America. Now, you know, I grew up in Tomah. I ran a weekly newspaper in Mansfield, Massachusetts, only slightly bigger than Tomah. And all of that time, I mean, I ran a weekly newspaper. I would have loved to have a bunch of murders in Mansfield, but I couldn't do it. You know, I couldn't talk anybody into committing murder. And I had people that that could have been murderers, but they just didn't have the gumption to go ahead and do it. And I could have pointed to people they should kill, but that didn't happen. And I didn't make any requests actually. I was running the newspaper. That would be fake news because that would be generating news. All right. So what makes it work? Now the secret is. Part of it is that that so many people come from small towns. They know the territory. If you come from a small town, you know most of the police in town just from hanging around, walking past them, or stopping and talking to them. My uncle in Tomah was Harold Lowe was a cop, and he eventually became a police chief. And my dad, who was a bartender, he knew every cop in town. One of his bars was right across families to come in and drink at his bar. So you know the town, you know the people, you know the territory. Everything is cozy, comfortable. And so that's one of the reasons why authors locate murders in small towns, even though they're not very logical. But you know, I have a list here of 5 things that make small town crime work. Okay, first is you have to have a good protagonist. You have Miss Marple in St. Mary Mead. You have Jessica Fletcher in Cabin Cove. And it's, you have the Louise Penny.
The Menage.
Yeah. Edmund Crispin wrote the movie Toy Shop.
Okay.
Edmund Crispin. And he's just, he only wrote 5 or 6, but they're all wonderful. A protagonist has to be, like Miss Marple, a little odd. But his or her idiosyncrasy set him apart from everybody else. He or she is not like the townspeople. To refer specifically, my protagonist is Jim Otis. He's the police chief. He used to be a cop in Chicago. He had an incident with a young woman who was underage, who was a prostitute. He was trying to help her. They ended up having an affair. It ruined his career with the Chicago police. It ruined his marriage, and it made him unemployable in most cities. So he ended up in the police chief in this little town in southern Wisconsin called Hercules. So this is this little bit of history tells you that he's flawed, he's afflicted with regrets and self-doubt. It renders him aloof but not unfriendly. Because he's a professional detective from Chicago, he's a better detective, he's a better sleuth than the town has ever seen. And he's also, and even when he was in Chicago, he was better than most of the other detectives. He's observant about the circumstances of the crime, but he keeps it to himself until he's sure of himself. These are all the qualities of a good sleuth. Except possibly Mr. Marple, just talk and talk. And because so many of these small town sleuths are a series, the author tries to reveal the protagonist, the main characters, gradually. We learn a little bit more about this person, about Jim Otis, as the books go along. My wife is right now reading Cheat, which is the 5th in the series, and she's gratified because she's finding out more about Jim Otis than she did in the previous 4 books. Ideally, and this is also common, with a lot of small town crime books. There's a sidekick. Think of Barney Fife. And also Dr. Watson with Sherlock Holmes. Robert B. Parker wrote the Spencer series. I don't know if any of you have read those. They're great reading. But his sidekick is Hawk. The dangerous black guy, and he doesn't so much provide comic relief as backup. And so there's a lot of ways you can use the sidekick character to enrich the story and support the protagonist. I don't know, you've probably seen the old Thin Man movies, but Nick and Nora Charles. Nick Charles is the detective, but Nora is a thorn in his side, and also an astute observer who helps him solve the crime in many cases. Among my favorites is our favorite detectives. Although these aren't necessarily small, but a lot of them happen in small towns. Our Martha Grimes series with Inspector Richard Jury, and he has a rich aristocrat who doesn't have a job, named Melrose Plant who helps out with the crime solving, and often sometimes underwrites the investigation, provides transportation, even money sometimes. But he's a very likable character, and he plays really well off Richard Jury. So the sidekick can be comic relief, sounding board, surprising moments of insight, and serves to deflate the protagonist's ego when the protagonist gets to fill himself. If you're doing, even if you're doing a one-off small town crime thing, it's good to have a cast of characters who are kind of a cross-section of the town, but also the more interesting people in town. Snoops, oddballs, gossips, know-it-alls, lovable bunglers, drunks, spies. They provide advice, commentary, which is usually misguided. They're wrong about it, but they give perspective and diversion and entertainment for the reader. When I'm reading Arthur Grimes' novel with Richard Jury, I always look forward to the gathering around the bar. One of the tricks in Arthur Grimes' novels is that every title is the name of a pub someplace in England, usually in a small town. The Deer League. One of my favorites is a London pub called I Am the Only Running Footman, which I've been to. It's near Berkeley Square, and when I knew it was there, I had to go there because I'd read the book. And now I think they shortened it to the Running Footman, but I still like I Am the Only Running Footman. And so every novel is built around one of these bars, and all of Richard Jury's cast eventually gather around him in one of these bars. It's good to have a sweetheart for the protagonist, male or female. Jim Otis has an English teacher at Hercules High named Carol Demeter. But one of the things that I've always noticed, my wife and I have been watching a lot of British murder mystery series, and for instance, Inspector Morse, he cannot get a woman to save his life. He keeps screwing up relationships, and then watching other ones, whether it's a woman or a man, they're invariably incompetent in relationships, and I think that's part of, I think that's an important element actually. If you want the protagonist has to be enough of a loner to make it difficult for him for her to get along with in a relationship that lasts. And also, there's always the police show cliche that you're married to the job, and so all those. I think it's just part of it. I'm deciding whether Jim and Carol are going to get married in the next episode, in the next book, or not. I'm leaning against it, partly because marriage changes a character, and I want to keep the relationship, but I don't necessarily want to make it that domestic. But I'll let you know when I come back after the next book. Okay, the next book is going to be called Upstairs. That's an element of horror in it. Subplots. My 5 books. Jailbait is basically an introduction of the character of Jim Otis and the introduction of his nemesis, teenage femme fatale named Josie Dobbs, who makes all kinds of trouble for him. Subsequent books, for instance, in Deadshot, it's a basketball ghost story. There's a ghost that haunts the gym at Hercules High ever since 1968 or so. And so we're dealing with the player who's being haunted by the ghost and his girlfriend, and also the ex-boyfriend of the girlfriend, who's a sadistic outlaw biker who comes to town trying to get her back and ready to kill anybody who gets in his way. And so Jim Otis becomes involved with the outlaw biker, and he becomes was responsible for protecting the basketball player and his girlfriend. With all that, you get more and more information about the town and the community and the cast of characters, and that's one of the responsibilities of doing a series like this, because you have to vary the situation. In Bastard's Blood, which is number 2, I have a mystery around a murder. Nobody gets killed because it's a small town. People don't get killed. But for instance, let's say in Sheet, there's a passage that my wife really thought was really expressive of the kind of additional color that has to go into a story like this, other than just having a murder and having it solved. The 2 characters involved here, they're meeting at the police station. Jim Otis has just picked up Tommy Meineke on a possible driving while intoxicated, and Tommy has been in trouble. He's been in trouble all his life. He's one of those kids that just can't get it fix things. Okay. Jim Otis has an auxiliary cop, a young guy named Teddy Gilbert, who's studying to get his criminology associate's degree at the vocational school in Fenimore. Now, Tommy and Teddy are basically contemporary with each other. Tommy, the troubled kid, Teddy, the goody two-shoes, who's going to be a cop. Tommy and Teddy might never have been friends by any normal definition, but they had occupied the same schools, churches, streets, alleys, playgrounds, and swimming holes since they were toddlers. Teddy had been in the same Cub Scout den and Little League team that Tommy had been kicked out of. They had played the same backyard games, cooled apples from the same orchards, read the same comic books, played video games at the Quick Trip, eaten the same pizza from Fusco's, played hockey together on the pond at Memorial Park, watched the same parades on the 4th of July, picked on the same smaller kids, got picked on by the same bigger kids, watched the same girls graduate from ankle socks to pantyhose. They had drunk their first legal beer at one of the same bars on Main Street. They might have never exchanged a civil word in their 20-some years on the planet, but they knew each other by proximity and reputation better than they knew their own parents. Junko really liked that, my wife. She thought that really captured what was going on in the town and between these 2 kids and with so many other kids in small towns. Besides that sort of thing, I include, for instance, in Master's Bluff especially, there's a lot of history of Hercules. I had to make up the history of Hercules, but it's fun to make up the history of Hercules. And there's more history in Woman Trouble and Deadshot. The history of why the gym is haunted is a fun story. It was actually a novel that I wrote without Jim Otis at all, and I revised the whole novel. Basically, I rewrote the whole thing to fit it into Hercules. So I had a good backstory for that. Local politics in Jailbait. Otis loses his job in Jailbait because of Josie Dobbs, and he's replaced by Lenny Snell, who's one of the local neighborhood watch guys, who's totally incompetent. So by the time Bastard's Bluff comes along, there's serious trouble. Lenny Snell can't handle it, and Jim Otis gets recruited to kind of unofficially solve the problem, which means that he gets back into the police chief job on the next book. In Cheat, the school board is the center of the story. So that's all local politics, but you know local politics, you know how it goes. I ran a weekly newspaper for 7 years. My God, I know local politics. Okay, and then we have the whole issue of who the bad guy or bad person is. You can't have a whole my Moriarty is Josie Dobbs. She shows up in jailmate, woman trouble, and in cheat as the main troublemaker. And so if you have a recurring villain, you can get away with you can justify a crime wave in a small town. That's one solution. And of course, then I've always made sure that she remained a lingering threat, and that's another trick that I had to work out from book to book. But that's also fun. So those are the 5 elements of getting away with small town crime: a good protagonist, an effective sidekick, an interesting cast, a lot of local color and history, politics, and a villain or villains who can be recycled from book to book to book. And all that stuff makes it much more believable. Or don't you believe me? Mark, and have you read a lot of crime novels?
No.
So you came here. You came here
Yeah.
under false pretenses.
No, not exactly.
Why did you come? What this is about the paradox of small town crime, and you haven't read that many small town crime books.
Well,
I don't mean to put you on the spot. I'm just curious.
No, the most recent is the Irish Detectives. I forget her name. What's her name? You know, the Irish writer I'm talking about who writes.
I think I know what you're talking about, but I haven't read her, so maybe.
Yeah, it's real.
Yeah.
She's pretty involved.
Right.
I mean, the writing gets real involved.
These crimes or mysteries.
Yeah, well, the detectives are trying to solve a death
Yeah.
in a park.
Are these police?
Yes.
Okay, so it's a police
Irish
procedural.
police.
A police procedural.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can tell you about police procedurals. No, the creator of the police procedural was an American writer named Edmund Bain. There were police procedurals before him. Edmund Bain worked with my agent Jack Scoville when he was very young, and they worked in a New York agency called the Scott Meredith Agency. Edmund Bain's real name was Salvatore Lambino. And Salvatore Lambino wrote under a bunch of different names, including Evan Hunter. You heard of the Blackboard Jungle.
Yes.
He wrote the Blackboard Jungle as Evan Hunter. But he wrote a series of police procedurals called the 87th Precinct series. He wrote 55 87th Precinct novels. But before he started writing, he went to the police stations in New York City, and he read DD5s, the police reports of hundreds of crimes. He went to the forensics lab, and he watched what they did to go through the evidence. He went to autopsies. He did all that stuff. He learned police procedure, and he wrote books based on that police procedure. And nobody had ever done that before. Not to that level. We're sure. What?
In years.
His first one was in the early 50s, I think 54, 55. But he was still writing at 87 Precinct novels in the 90s. And one of the fascinating things for me about reading through all the 87 Precinct novels is, he had curbed the language of the crooks and the cops in 1953, but he didn't have to do that in 2000. So the realism, at least in terms of the dialogue, became much greater as the series went on. But he would, virtually all of his. But he also had a recurring villain. There was a very shadowy character called the Deaf Man, and the Deaf Man pops up in about half a dozen of the 87 Precinct novels, and always gets away so that he can make trouble again. So it's just one of those things that when you're doing a series, if you can reduce the number of, reduce the pool of suspects. I think it's really helpful. And plus you get to create a really interesting character. Walt Disney once said that every good story needs a good villain. And one of my novels, Fat Vinny's Forbidden Love. Fat Vinny was a kid I knew in grade school. His name was not Fat Vinny. I changed his name. but he was really the most repulsive kid in the history of Tomah. But this is a book in which he is the center of the story because the character is so interesting. And what it is he's in love with one of the nuns at St. Mary's School. He's in 8th grade, and my character Benji's in 7th grade, and Benji becomes like the intermediary between Fat Vinny and this nun he's in love with, and of course it's all a comedy, but Fat Vinny really was a fun character to write, and of course I knew the kid in real life, but I was able to expand the character and make him do things that he never really did, and yet all of it was very true to how I knew him when I was a kid. So I've given my presentation. Have you heard it?
I was going to ask you, do you write red herrings as you're going along, or you plan those out?
Oh, let's see, I think I do. Yeah, right. Yeah, and they have to be planned. Yeah, there are a couple of red herrings in the sheet, and you have to, because the plot in the sheet is there's the most prestigious test in Wisconsin for the winner. One kid every year wins a full ride to the university if they're tops on the test, and a girl from Hercules wins, and the teacher, Carol, the girlfriend of Jim August, can't believe it. She was the test prep teacher, and among the half a dozen kids from Hercules who did the test prep, Heather was the worst. And then she goes to Madison, and she beats all these kids from Brookfield and their university school and Edgewood High and all these very powerful academic and schools. And then it turns out she was cheating. She got the answers, and Carol is the one who gets accused of having the answers. And so Jim has to save Carol from being thrown out of not only out of the school, but the schools in Hercules, but out of teaching entirely. And it's all entangled with with the test proctor in Madison, who was guilty of helping Heather get the answers. But it gets all more tangled after that with misdirections along the way. My wife is weak, and she's having a lot of fun.
So when you're writing a small town, and it sounds like it goes through 4 or 5 books in the series.
Yeah.
Do you keep some kind of like a map of what the town looks like?
I have a map. Yeah, I have a map of Hercules. That's a really good question. Yeah. But I also have what I call a concordance, which isn't. It's a little bit messy. Some of it's redundant, but I have a list of all the characters, and if I have a description of the character, a little thumbnail of the character, I add that to the material, to the listing, and I have all the characters in I do that. My characters in alphabetical order, and I make sure I know which books they were in. But it's basically I have this little encyclopedia of the Jim Otis series, because if I don't do that, I can't have a character do something in one book that they do the opposite 3 books later. So I have to keep track of that.
Keeping the history of the town, what the main industry was, needs to be the same in the first book and the fourth book.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And the fun thing about it, since I decided to name the town Hercules, and I'm not sure why. just popped into my head. But this allowed me to include, you know, going way back, you know, one of the founders of the town was fascinated with the Greek myths and so forth. So a lot of the streets have Greek myth names, like Perseus Street and Venus Street, and so forth, you know. So it's just and you know, yeah, I did that, and it's in the book, but nobody ever mentions that. They don't, you know, it shouldn't be noticeable, you know. Right. Yeah. No, I mean, it's noticeable, but it's something that
You're not calling it out specifically.
yeah, right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's what?
Oh, I'm sorry. I
Yeah,
didn't-
no, sorry. No. No.
You're hoping for a series?
Pardon?
A series,
A series.
like on Netflix?
Oh, you mean you want me to be on TV?
Well, I just
No,
wondered what you're thinking.
No, I would love
Because
for
there are
it.
so many
I would
now.
love for a production company to come along and offer me $1 million, yes. But I talked to my agent a long time ago about Hollywood, and he said, well, what happens is that the producer is away for 2 weeks, and then he comes back, and there's a stack of treatments on his desk, okay? And a treatment is a one-page summary of a 300-page book, and he looks at the top 3, and he decides to produce one, and anything below the top 3 is just garbage. It's just the Hollywood system is pig in the public. Lately, I discovered that there's a production company, or not even a production company, a kind of a go-between called the Blacklist. I'm not sure why they call it the Blacklist, because that suggests McCarthyism and so forth. But it's a bunch of people who receive story ideas, including whole books, and vet them before, and they have connections with production companies. So they pre-vet these screenplays or books or whatever the story is to see. So it creates an extra avenue for getting into Hollywood. And since there are actually no genuine avenues for getting into Hollywood except dumb luck, or being famous, or for some reason, McHale's Navy became a movie, who knows why. They like to, they love to do sequels, and they love to use material that's already been someplace else because they're afraid of making a mistake, they're afraid of losing money, and it costs so much to make movies, and television shows. But I'm going to be sending one of my manuscripts to the Blacklist and see what happens. My wife suggested that my first book, The Life and Times of the Last Kid Picked, should be the one, so I'm going to take her advice. She usually gives good advice.
So you're quite prolific with 19 books. What is your writing schedule, or how do you write so much?
How do I write so much? Well, I've always been fast. I guess my style is that I figure out my story, and I know, one of the keys is you always don't have to know how it ends before you start writing the beginning. Another rule that I try to follow is if you come up with a really good title, that's not the story, that's just the title. For instance, Almost Killed by a Train of Thought, which is my essay book. I got that from the Monroe High School yearbook in 1965, I believe, because whoever was the editor of the yearbook in Monroe High was really smart, really funny, really clever, and they had a saying under each of the seniors' photos, and one of them read, "Almost killed by a train of thought running through his head." And I thought, what a great line. And I always remember that. But what talking about the style of writing, I go through, I have the story sketched out, and then I just, I plug my way through the story and probably get it done in, for instance, if I were just writing constantly and not doing my weekly screed and my other stuff and running to the grocery store and doing all the other crap that I have to do, I could probably knock off the entire first draft in 3 months. Usually now it takes more like 8 or 9 months because I got other stuff to do. But then the part that I like the best is going back through it 3 or 4 times and fixing it and embellishing it and tightening it and doing all the things on it, editing it basically. Besides being a writer, I've been an editor for most of my career too. I can edit. I've been my wife is a journalist. She's working in a second language, so she's always demands that I copy edit everything she writes. So I've been copy editing her for 30 years. So as much as I would like to quit being a copy editor, that's not the woman who makes me copy edit. But I really enjoy it. The job of actually writing the first draft. Let's see, I think it was Red Smith, the sports writer, who said, writing is easy. You just sit down with your typewriter and open a vein. And so once the draft is done, once I've opened the vein, then working it over is a pleasure. And I feel good after, at the end, when I finally send the book off to my own copy editor, I feel good because I know I've been through it repeatedly and I've accomplished what I wanted to do when I wrote the title down at the top of the first page. But there are other writers, James Joyce added 90,000 words to Ulysses after it went to the press. There are 1,000 different styles of writing, and for some people it really is opening your vein and never just bleeding forever. They just struggle and struggle and struggle. I'm glad I don't.
How heavily do you plot out the entire story?
I don't plot it out heavily at all. Basically I list episodes, and I try to list them in the order that they're supposed to happen. And then very often, as I'm writing, a character who is supposed to be 2 sentences suddenly becomes a 50-page character, or not that much, but 5 or 6 pages, and the character does something unexpected, and so it changes the plot. And that becomes a problem, then I have to solve that problem. But I work my way through episode by episode, sometimes adding material, sometimes taking stuff away because something I've added makes the thing, another part unnecessary. So it's really kind of a fluid process that if I work from that copy, maybe all I do, I learned how to do a grade school. I could write it, another one or two, A and B and one, and C and so forth. I mean, I can do that, but I haven't done it for since college, since before that. Can you still do that?
Oh, no.
Right. And you're a librarian, species.
Yeah. Well,
So is anybody going to buy any books? No, you don't have to. But if you don't buy a book, please take one of my bookmarks because it has my website on it. And you can buy books from.
Who's your publisher?
I am the publisher. It's
You're
called-
the editor.
Yeah. Here's a bookmark.
Thank you.
It's Last Kid Books. And it's on the other side. So, thank you, Carol.
yeah, thanks for coming.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm glad we got at least 2 people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I love mysteries. They're yeah, yeah, we do have some in the library.
Or read one, for Christ's sake.
Okay, okay.
Well, thank you for coming.
I was thinking,